The notification on Staff Sergeant Kiera Ashford's encrypted phone cut through the midnight silence of her Fort Benning barracks like a blade. She'd been awake anyway, sitting cross-legged on her bunk with the components of her Barrett M82 spread before her on a field cloth. A ritual she performed every Sunday night, whether she had a mission coming or not. The phone's screen cast a cold blue glow across her face as she read the number. No name, just a prefix that made her pulse quicken, even as her expression remained calm. JSOC. Joint Special Operations Command didn't call at midnight unless the world was about to get very complicated for someone. Staff Sergeant Ashford, she answered, her voice steady and professional, despite the adrenaline beginning to thread through her veins. Ashford, this is Colonel Matthews, JSOC Operation. The voice was clipped, efficient, belonging to someone who'd made 1,000 calls like this and would make 1,000 more. You have a fragmentary order, pack your gear, wheels up in 4 hours. Kira's hand paused on the Barrett's boat carrier group, but only for a heartbeat. Destination, sir? Afghanistan, FOB Atlas. That's all I can tell you over this line. Your orders are being transmitted now. This is classified at the highest level. Acknowledge. Acknowledge, sir. The line went dead. For exactly 3 seconds, Kira allowed herself to sit motionless, processing. Then she moved. Her hands worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. First, reassembling the Barrett with swift, economical movements, each component sliding into place with the familiar mechanical precision that had become as natural to her as breathing. The rifle had a serial number etched into its receiver, M82-039-TC. Most soldiers wouldn't know what those letters meant. Kira knew them like she knew her own name. Trevor Charles, her father, 1st Marine Division, Desert Storm, 1991. He'd carried this rifle through the Kuwaiti desert, through sandstorms and oil fires, through chaos that he'd only spoken about in fragments during her childhood. She ran her fingers along the barrel, a gesture that was half maintenance check, half prayer, then secured the rifle in its hard case. The case itself was scarred and dented, bearing the marks of a dozen deployments, transport flights, and the general violence of military logistics. Inside, custom foam padding cradled each component like a mother protecting her child. Her deployment bag was already 90% ready. That was another habit she developed after her first combat tour. Never be caught flat-footed when the call came. She added the essentials now. Extra uniforms in Army multicam, hygiene kit, personal medical supplies, and the small waterproof notebook where she kept her range data and ballistic calculations. 5 years of information, logged in her precise handwriting. Temperature variations, wind patterns, bullet performance at altitude, success rates, and yes, the failures too. Every shooter had them. The difference was whether you learned from them or pretended they never happened. But there was one more thing. Kira knelt beside her bunk and reached underneath, pulling out a small lockbox. Inside, wrapped in a cloth that had once been part of her father's Marine Corps uniform, was a photograph. Trevor Ashford, in his desert camouflage, 29 years old, standing beside his spotter somewhere in Kuwait. The photo was faded, the colors washed out by time, but his smile was clear, confident. The smile of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. She'd been 8 years old when he first took her shooting, not on some manicured range, but out in the Montana wilderness where he'd grown up, where his father had taught him. A bolt-action .22 rifle that was almost as tall as she was. She remembered the weight of it, the way her father's hands had guided hers, his voice patient and calm. Shooting isn't about strength, Kira. It's about patience, breath control, understanding that the rifle is just a tool. You're the weapon. He taught her to read wind in the trees, to account for temperature, to respect the mathematics of ballistics while trusting her instincts. By the time she was 12, She could outshoot boys twice her age. By 16, she was winning regional competitions. By 21, she'd enlisted in the Army with one goal: to become a sniper like her father. The photograph went into her pocket, always did, every deployment. She stood, shouldering her deployment bag and gripping the Barrett's case. Her watch read 0047 hours. Wheels up in 3 hours and 53 minutes. Time to move. The C-130 Hercules transport was exactly as uncomfortable as every other military cargo flight Kira had ever endured. She was the only passenger among pallets of supplies bound for various bases across Afghanistan. Ammunition, medical supplies, repair parts, all the endless logistics that kept a war machine running. The loadmaster, a staff sergeant who looked about 19 despite probably being mid-20s, offered her earplugs and a bottle of water before disappearing into the cockpit area. Alone with the cargo and the deafening roar of the engines, Kira pulled out her notebook. The pages were filled with data, but they were more than just numbers. Each entry represented a moment when everything had depended on her calculations being correct. Each one was a life saved or a threat eliminated. She reviewed her last qualification shoot from 3 weeks ago. Groups at 1,500 meters, all within a 6-inch spread. She'd been shooting well lately, her body and mind in that rare state of perfect synchronization that separated good snipers from exceptional ones. But there was something else in the notebook too, something she hadn't shown anyone. On the inside back cover, written in her father's handwriting, transferred from a letter he'd sent her during her basic training, were 4 words. Trust your fundamentals, always. He died 6 years ago. Cancer, the kind that came from breathing toxic smoke from burn pits during deployments. He'd made it home from Desert Storm, from Somalia, from Iraq, only to be killed by invisible poison years later. He'd lasted long enough to see her graduate from basic training, but not long enough to see her earn her sniper tab. Not long enough to know that she'd become exactly what he'd trained her to be. She touched the words with her fingertip, then closed the notebook. The flight was 16 hours with 2 refueling stops. Kira slept in 45-minute increments, a skill she'd mastered years ago. When she was awake, she reviewed terrain maps on her tablet, studied ballistic tables, and performed the mental exercises that kept her sharp. Visualization, breath control, the meditation of preparation. Bagram Airfield struck her like a physical force when she stepped off the transport. The Afghan heat was massive and immediate even in the early morning hours, wrapping around her like a living thing. The air smelled of dust and jet fuel and something else, that distinctive scent of a war zone, a mixture of burning trash and ancient earth and human desperation that every veteran recognized instantly. A young lieutenant with ranger tabs was waiting at the aircraft. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, his bearing professional but friendly. Staff Sergeant Ashford? That's me, sir. Lieutenant Carver, I'm your liaison to get you to FOB Atlas. We have a Black Hawk waiting. He eyed her rifle case with the kind of professional interest that told her he knew exactly what was inside. They said to expedite your movement. Whatever you're here for must be important. Kira adjusted her grip on the case. Honestly, sir, I don't know what I'm here for. I was just told to show up. The Black Hawk flight took another 90 minutes, following valleys and ridgelines in the tactical flight pattern designed to minimize exposure to potential threats. Kira watched the landscape pass below, through the open door, secured by her harness but leaning slightly out to sea. She'd been here before, had operated in these mountains, but the terrain never lost its harsh beauty or its danger. Afghanistan was a graveyard of empires, a land that had swallowed armies for thousands of years. The mountains were timeless, indifferent to human conflict, wearing away soldiers and nations with equal patience. FOB. Atlas appeared as they crested a ridge, a collection of reinforced buildings, HESCO barriers, and guard towers carved into a mountainside. The base was small, which meant it was either a logistics hub or a Special Operations Forward Operating Point. Given her summons from JSOC, Kira suspected the latter. The helicopter flared and landed in a cloud of dust that turned the world briefly opaque. Kira jumped out the moment the wheels touched down, moving quickly away from the rotor wash with her gear secure. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up as she cleared the landing zone. A sailor in Navy Type 3 camouflage uniforms was waiting at the edge of the LZ. His bearing marked him as Special Operations, even without the SEAL Trident insignia visible on his chest. He didn't introduce himself, just nodded once. "Staff Sergeant Ashford, follow me, the Admiral is waiting." Admiral. Kira's mental assessment of the situation shifted immediately. Flag officers didn't typically involve themselves in individual soldier movements unless something significant was happening. Very significant. She followed the SEAL through a maze of barriers and sandbag walls, noting the increased security. Guards at every checkpoint, multiple layers of entry control, hardened facilities that suggested this base dealt with operations that didn't make it into official reports. They arrived at a nondescript building with reinforced walls and a cipher-locked door. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees thanks to industrial air conditioning units that labored against the Afghan heat. The SEAL led her down a corridor and stopped at a conference room entrance. "They're waiting for you inside, Staff Sergeant." He paused, then added, "Good luck." He knocked twice and opened the door. Kira stepped into the room and felt every eye turn toward her, like targeting lasers. At least 15 men sat around a large table covered with maps, satellite imagery, and tactical planning materials. All of them wore the tan uniforms of Naval Special Warfare. All of them were SEALs, some of the most elite warriors in the American military. And she, in her Army multicam, was clearly not part of their brotherhood. The silence was immediate and heavy. At the head of the table sat a man whose presence dominated the room with the kind of natural authority that couldn't be taught or faked. Rear Admiral Fletcher Donovan was in his early 60s with steel gray hair cut high and tight, a face weathered by decades of sun and wind and combat, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. 3 rows of ribbons on his chest told a story of service that spanned conflicts most Americans had forgotten. The Navy Cross sat at the top, multiple silver stars below it. Combat decorations from Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. A career written in valor and blood. Donovan looked up from a personnel file, her file, Kira realized, and his expression hardened like concrete setting. The room's silence deepened. "Who the hell authorized this?" His voice carried the command authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience, cutting through the air like a sword. He slapped the file onto the table hard enough that the sound echoed off the walls. "Someone explained to me why, in the middle of the most critical mission of the year, Command sends me a staff sergeant from Fort Benning instead of a SEAL sniper." Kira stood at attention near the doorway, her face carefully neutral, but her mind was already working. She'd faced skepticism before. From instructors at sniper school who didn't think women belonged there. From conventional units who questioned special operations soldiers. From anyone who judged the book by its cover instead of reading the pages. She would let her skills do the talking. They always did. "At ease, Staff Sergeant." Donovan's tone suggested he was anything but at ease with the situation. "Take a seat." Kira moved to the only empty chair, positioned at the far end of the table away from the Admiral. She set her rifle case carefully against the wall, noting how several of the SEAL's eyes followed the Barrett's distinctive profile. Good. Let them wonder. As she sat, she quickly scanned the satellite imagery spread across the table. Topographic maps of mountainous terrain, thermal imaging of a compound, target photographs. This was clearly a direct action mission, and from the detail level, it was being planned down to the second. Donovan stood, picking up a laser pointer with the kind of precise movement that spoke of decades in the field. "Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant, let me bring everyone up to speed." He clicked a remote and a photograph appeared on the screen mounted on the wall. The image showed a bearded man in his mid-40s wearing traditional Afghan clothing. His eyes were cold, calculating, belonging to someone who'd seen violence and dealt it in equal measure. This is Hassan al-Rashid, Taliban senior commander. He's responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, including the IED network that's killed 17 American soldiers in the past month alone. Donovan's voice hardened with each word. He's also the architect behind the ambush of a Ranger team 2 weeks ago. 4 men didn't make it home because of him. The room's atmosphere grew heavier. Every man there had lost brothers in arms. This wasn't just another mission. This was personal in the way that only military operations could be. A debt owed, a score to settle, justice delivered with precision. Donovan advanced the slides, showing more images of Hassan meeting with other insurgents, receiving weapons shipments, surveying terrain for future attacks. Our intelligence assets have been tracking him for months, but he's smart, moves constantly, never sleeps in the same location twice, surrounds himself with experienced fighters who know their business. Another click brought up a satellite image of a compound nestled in a mountain valley. Yesterday we got a break. Hassan is meeting with 2 other high-level commanders at this location. Our sources confirm he'll be there for exactly 48 hours before moving again. This is our window. Kira leaned forward slightly, her trained eye analyzing the topography. The compound sat in a natural fortress, steep mountains on 3 sides, a narrow valley approach that would be a killing zone for any ground assault, and what appeared to be multiple defensive positions carefully sited for interlocking fields of fire. Now here's our problem, Donovan continued, zooming in on the satellite image. The compound is heavily defended, 20 to 30 fighters minimum, PKM machine guns, RPGs, and they've mined the approaches. A direct assault would result in unacceptable casualties, even for this target. He moved the laser pointer across the image, tracing a line from a ridge on the opposite side of the valley to the compound. The only viable option is a precision strike. We eliminate Hassan, then the assault team moves in to exploit the chaos and capture or kill the other commanders. One of the SEAL team leaders, a lieutenant commander with a thick beard and a scar across his jawline, spoke up. "Sir, what's the distance from the hide site to target?" Donovan's response was flat, matter-of-fact. 2,387 meters. The room erupted in low whistles and muttered comments. Kira kept her expression neutral, but her mind was already working through the calculations. Nearly 1.5 miles. At that distance, she'd need to account for significant bullet drop, wind deflection across multiple terrain features, the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, air density changes from altitude, and the downward angle of the shot. It was an extreme range shot even for a .50 caliber round. Exactly, Donovan continued, acknowledging the reactions. Which is why I've spent the past week contacting every qualified long-range precision shooter in theater. The Marine scout sniper who made that 1,800-meter shot in Fallujah? He looked at the terrain and said the angle makes it impossible. Too steep, too much vegetation blocking the sightline. The Army Special Forces sniper from 3rd Group? He calculated the wind variance in that valley and said we'd need a miracle. Donovan's eyes swept the room. I had a SEAL chief with 15 years of experience tell me that even if someone could make the shot, the window of opportunity is too narrow. Hassan only exposes himself for about 90 seconds when he steps onto the balcony for morning prayers. 90 seconds to range, calculate, and fire. One chance. Miss, and he disappears for another 6 months while more Americans die. The Admiral turned his gaze directly to Kira, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical thing. So when command tells me they're sending the perfect shooter for this mission, I expect a SEAL with a proven record at extreme distance. Instead I get, he gestured toward her, the implication clear, an Army Staff Sergeant I've never heard of. Kira met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. She understood his concern. Lives depended on this shot, and he didn't know her capabilities. Fair enough. But she also knew her record spoke for itself. If only he'd actually read it instead of just looking at her rank and uniform. Staff Sergeant Ashford, Donovan said, his tones shifting to interrogation mode. Your file says you qualified as an Army sniper 3 years ago. What's your longest confirmed kill? 1,847 meters, sir. Helmand Province, 18 months ago. Confirmed by 2 spotters in aerial surveillance, sir. Taliban weapons facilitator. The after-action report is classified, but it's in my jacket. Target was stationary or moving? Moving, sir. Walking across a compound courtyard. A few of the SEALs exchanged glances. An 1,800-meter shot on a moving target was genuinely impressive, regardless of service branch. Mountain warfare experience? Donovan pressed. 14 months in the Hindu Kush, sir. Operating at elevations between 6,000 and 12,000 feet. Familiar with the Barrett M82? Yes, sir. I've logged approximately 10,000 rounds through my weapon. She paused, then added, I hand-load my own ammunition to ensure consistency. Donovan walked slowly around the table toward her, his expression unreadable in the way that senior officers learned after decades of command. The M82 is a heavy weapon. How do you handle recoil management on extended operations? Proper position, sir. Technique over strength, and I train with it constantly. How many failed shots have you had in combat? Kira didn't hesitate. Honesty was a weapon too. 3, sir. 1 due to unexpected wind shift. 1 because the target moved behind cover during bullet flight time. And 1 because my spotter gave me incorrect range data. Donovan seemed slightly surprised by her candor. Most soldiers would have claimed perfection or found ways to deflect. Kira knew better. Every sniper who'd seen real combat had misses. The ones who claimed otherwise were either lying or hadn't been in enough fights. The lieutenant commander with the scar, Kira caught his name tape, Merrick, leaned toward Donovan and whispered something. She couldn't hear the words, but she caught the skeptical expression, the subtle shake of his head. The message was clear enough. This was a mistake. Donovan nodded slightly, then turned back to Kira. His face carried something that might have been regret, but his voice was firm. Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your service and your candor, but this mission requires absolute precision under the worst possible conditions. I can't risk American lives on an unknown quantity, regardless of what your file says. He moved toward the door, the decision made. I'm going to contact command and request they send us someone with more experience at extreme range. Someone whose capabilities I can personally verify. I'm sure you understand. It's nothing personal. Kira stood smoothly. The movement was precise and controlled. The sound of her chair pushing back just loud enough to stop Donovan mid-step. Every eye in the room turned toward her again, but this time the quality of attention was different. Admiral. Her voice was quiet but carried perfectly through the silence. Permission to show you my weapon and credentials, sir. Something in her demeanor, the calm confidence, the absolute certainty that lived in her posture and tone, made Donovan pause. He was a man who'd built a career on reading people, on making split-second assessments of character and capability under pressure. He studied her face for a long moment, and Kira held his gaze without challenge or submission, just professional certainty. Finally, he gestured toward her rifle case. Granted, Staff Sergeant, show me what you've got. But before Kira could move to the case, the conference room door opened again. An older man entered, and the room's energy shifted immediately. He was in his late 60s, civilian clothes instead of uniform, but his bearing was unmistakably military. White hair cropped military short, a face weathered by decades of sun and wind and hard living. He moved with controlled precision despite his age, each step deliberate and economical. His eyes were the color of flint, and they swept the room with the kind of assessment that came from a lifetime of evaluating threats and opportunities. Admiral Donovan straightened slightly. Gentlemen, this is Colonel Wyatt Brennan, Retired 4 years ago, but I called him back because nobody, and I mean nobody, reads wind in mountain terrain like granite. Granite. That was a call sign earned through experience, not given lightly. Donovan continued, Colonel, you'll spot for whoever takes this shot. Brennan surveyed the room, his gaze passing over the seals before landing on Kira. He saw the Army uniform, saw the female soldier in a room full of male special operators. His face hardened, almost imperceptibly. Admiral, with all due respect, I've spotted for SEAL snipers for 30 years. His voice was gravelly, shaped by age and decades of command. I'm not sure. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had locked onto Kira's rifle case sitting against the wall. He walked toward it slowly, his movement suddenly careful, almost reverent. The case was worn, battle-scarred, covered with the stickers and markings that accumulated over years of deployments. But it was something specific that had caught his attention. Brennan knelt beside the case, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch something on its exterior. He was reading something, numbers and letters etched into the hard plastic near the handle. His voice came out barely above a whisper. M82-039-TC. He looked up sharply at Kira, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Recognition in something else. Ghost pain. Memory. This was Trevor Ashford's rifle. The room went absolutely silent. Kira felt her pulse kick up despite her control. My father, sir, 1st Marine Division, Desert Storm. Brennan stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. His expression had transformed completely, skepticism replaced by something deeper and more complex. Trevor Ashford. I knew him. Kuwait, 1991. We worked Overwatch together during the ground offensive. His voice grew thick with emotion that decades of military discipline couldn't quite suppress. He was one of the finest Marines I ever served with. We held a position for 3 days outside Kuwait City. Brennan paused, collecting himself. He saved my life. Spotted an Iraqi position I'd missed. His call prevented me from walking into an ambush. He looked back down at the rifle case, then up at Kira again. I'm sorry for your loss. Trevor was a good man, a great Marine. When did he? 6 years ago, sir. Cancer from burn pit exposure. Brennan nodded slowly, understanding in his face. Too many warriors survived the bullets, only to be killed by poison years later. He spoke of you, had a photograph in his kit. His daughter said he was teaching you to shoot. Yes, sir. He started teaching me when I was 8. Then you were trained by the best. Brennan turned to Admiral Donovan, and his entire demeanor had shifted. Admiral, if Trevor Ashford trained his daughter, if she carries his rifle, then she was taught by a master. I'll spot for her. It would be an honor. Donovan looked between Brennan and Kira, reassessing. Colonel, you're certain? Absolutely certain, sir. Trevor wouldn't have passed that rifle to someone who couldn't use it. Kira moved to her rifle case, feeling the weight of the room's attention, but no longer burdened by it. Her fingers entered the combination lock with practiced ease. Her father's birthday, the same combination she'd used for 6 years. The metallic click seemed unnaturally loud in the silent briefing room. She opened the case, revealing custom foam padding that cradled the disassembled components of her Barrett M82. The distinctive barrel emerged first as she lifted it from its cradle. 50 inches of matte black steel worn smooth in specific places where her hands had gripped it thousands of times. This wasn't a safe queen or a showpiece. This was a working weapon that had seen real combat, and it showed. Her hands moved with fluid confidence, assembling the weapon with the kind of muscle memory that came from repetition measured in years, not months. The upper receiver locked into place with a satisfying mechanical click. The bolt carrier group slid home. Each movement was economical, purposeful, free of hesitation or wasted motion. She'd assembled this rifle in pitch darkness, in sandstorms, in the back of moving vehicles. Here in the air-conditioned briefing room with perfect lighting, It took her less than 30 seconds. The assembled Barrett M82 now lay on the conference table, and every operator in the room leaned forward to examine it. Brennan lifted it carefully, his experienced hands immediately noting the modifications. This isn't standard issue. You've customized it. Modified muzzle brake, upgraded the bipod to an Atlas, added a bubble level to the scope mount. He squinted at the serial number etched into the receiver, then looked up at Kira with new respect. This is an early military model. You've been shooting this specific rifle for what, 5 years? Yes, sir. It was my father's before it was mine. He carried it through Desert Storm. Brennan set the rifle down gently, as if it were a sacred object. He modified it exactly this way. The brake modification, the bipod upgrade. I remember watching him make those changes in Kuwait. His voice softened. Your old man taught you well, Staff Sergeant. Kira reached back into the case and withdrew her loopholed Mark V HD scope. Its tube was covered in tiny scratches and dings that spoke of hard use, of missions in environments that ate equipment. I use this for extreme range work, 35 power magnification, first focal plane reticle. I've personally verified the parallax adjustment at every 100-meter increment from 500 to 2,500 meters. She set the scope beside the rifle, then added her ballistic computer, her laser rangefinder, and finally a worn leather logbook. This contains every shot I've taken beyond 1,000 meters for the past 5 years. Environmental conditions, calculations, results. I review it before every mission. Admiral Donovan picked up the logbook, flipping through pages filled with Kira's precise handwriting. Columns of numbers, sketches of wind patterns, notes about bullet performance at various temperatures and altitudes, detailed after-action reviews of successful shots, and more importantly, failed ones. It was the journal of someone obsessed with perfection, someone who treated long-range shooting not as a job, but as a calling. This is impressive work, Staff Sergeant, Donovan admitted, though his tone still carried reservation. But hardware and data logs don't. He stopped mid-sentence. Kira had turned slightly to reach for her drag bag, and as she did, her uniform blouse shifted. The fluorescent lights of the briefing room caught on something metallic pinned above her name tape, and Donovan's eyes locked onto her chest. His words died in his throat. The room fell into absolute silence as every operator followed the Admiral's gaze. Above Kira's name tape sat the Army Sniper tab, a black and gold arc that marked her as a graduate of one of the military's most challenging schools. Below it, the Special Operations Sniper insignia, a prestigious badge that required years of advanced training and operational experience to earn. But those weren't what made Admiral Donovan's face go pale. Pinned beside her standard qualification badges was a small, distinguished gold insignia that most soldiers would never recognize, but any serious long-range shooter would know instantly. The Distinguished International Shooter Badge, a sunburst design surrounding crossed rifles. It was awarded only to shooters who placed in the top 3% of international military shooting competitions. Fewer than 50 American soldiers currently serving had earned this recognition. Next to it sat something even rarer, the Presidential Service Badge with crossed rifles and a single star. This wasn't given for participation. It was awarded to shooters who had performed extraordinary service at the request of the President's Security Detail or Special Operations Command. The exact criteria were classified, but the badge's presence meant Kira had operated at the absolute highest levels of military precision shooting. And there was one more pin, so small and unassuming that it would be easy to miss. A silver bullet on a black backing. No official military insignia sheet listed this pin. It wasn't available through supply channels or military clothing sales. It was handmade, given only by other snipers to those who had made shots that defied belief. Shots that became legend. Donovan's hand trembled slightly as he set down the logbook. His eyes traced each badge and pin, his expression transforming from skepticism to shock to something approaching awe. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Your phantom." The word electrified the room like a lightning strike. Chairs scraped as every SEAL either stood or leaned forward. Lieutenant Commander Merrick's mouth actually fell open. Master Chief Boone Thatcher's eyes went wide. Even the younger operators who might not have known the full story recognized the name. Phantom, the ghost sniper whose exploits were whispered about in special operations communities across every service branch. "You're the shooter from Kandahar," Donovan continued, his voice gaining strength as pieces fell into place. "The 6 kills in 12 seconds, the impossible angle through the compound wall, the shot that—" He stopped, his jaw working as emotion crossed his face. "My godson was on that SEAL team. Lieutenant Preston Donovan. You saved his life." Kira met his gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying, but her silence spoke volumes. Merrick found his voice, rough with shock. The after-action report said the supporting sniper was an Army asset, but the name was redacted. Command said they were keeping the shooter's identity classified for security reasons. We all assumed it was Delta or some specialized unit. We had no idea it was— He gestured helplessly at Kira. "A staff sergeant," Master Chief Thatcher finished, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face, "who trained at Marine Corps Scout Sniper School and outshot every Marine in her class. I heard about that. Instructors are still talking about it." Colonel Brennan moved around the table, and for a moment Kira thought he might reprimand her for not speaking up sooner. Instead, he stopped directly in front of her and extended his hand, his eyes shining with emotion. "Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford, Phantom." His voice was thick. "I owe you an apology, both as a soldier who questioned your abilities and as someone whose friend's daughter you've become. Trevor would be so damn proud of what you've accomplished." Admiral Donovan stepped forward, his earlier skepticism completely erased. He extended his hand as well. "Staff Sergeant, I owe you multiple apologies. As a commander who questioned your capabilities, as a man who let assumptions cloud his judgment, and as Preston's godfather." His voice cracked slightly. "That shot in Kandahar saved my godson's life. He came home to his wife and infant daughter because of you. I've wanted to thank the shooter who pulled off that miracle for 18 months, and here you are, standing in my briefing room while I questioned whether you could handle the mission." Kira shook both hands firmly, her composure steady. "You were doing your job, sir. You didn't know me. I respect that a commander questions unknown variables." Donovan shook his head. "The mission is yours, Staff Sergeant, if you want it." His tone now carried absolute conviction. "I won't order you to take this shot. It's dangerous. The odds are brutal. And if something goes wrong, you'll be alone on that ridge with limited exfiltration options. But if you're willing—" He paused, meeting her eyes with complete honesty. "I can't think of anyone in the entire United States military I'd rather have behind that Barrett." Kira didn't hesitate. "I'm here to work, Admiral. Let's get it done." Donovan nodded once, then turned to address the room with command authority fully restored. "Gentlemen, let me make something crystal clear. Staff Sergeant Ashford is now the primary shooter for this operation. She will have full authority over all mission planning related to the precision strike. Her requirements are our requirements. Her timeline is our timeline. Does anyone have a problem with that?" Silence. Then Lieutenant Commander Merrick stood and moved toward Kira, extending his hand. The scar across his jawline pulled slightly as he spoke. "Staff Sergeant, I apologize for my earlier skepticism. It would be an honor to work with you." One by one, the other SEALs followed suit, introducing themselves, shaking her hand. Their earlier hostility had been replaced by professional respect and genuine curiosity about the legend who just walked into their midst. Master Chief Thatcher was last. He studied Kira with eyes that had seen 3 decades of combat. "Chief Petty Officer Thatcher, ma'am, I'd like to volunteer as your operations coordinator. I know these mountains, and I know how to get you what you need." Colonel Brennan stepped forward again. "And I'll be honored to spot for you, if you'll have me. I worked with your father. It's only right I work with his daughter. Kira felt something shift in her chest. Not quite emotion, but acknowledgement. These men had questioned her, yes, but they'd also adapted instantly when presented with evidence. That was professionalism. That was the mark of true warriors who cared about mission success more than ego. The honor is mine, Colonel. All of yours. Admiral Donovan clapped his hands once, breaking up the moment and refocusing the room. All right, we've wasted enough time on my skepticism. Staff Sergeant Ashford, Colonel Brennan, you have 48 hours to plan this shot and prepare. The rest of you, let's start mission planning for the follow-on assault. We've got work to do. The room erupted into organized chaos, maps spreading across tables, operators breaking into planning groups, the kinetic energy of professionals preparing for violence. Colonel Brennan gestured to Kira. Staff Sergeant, let's you and I find somewhere quiet to talk shop. We need to discuss wind patterns in that valley, and I've got some experience that might help. As they moved toward a side room, Admiral Donovan caught Kira's eye one more time. He nodded, a gesture of respect between warriors, an acknowledgement of capability recognized. The Barrett M82 lay on the table where she'd assembled it, no longer just a rifle, but a promise. In 48 hours, it would speak with the voice of American justice across nearly 1.5 miles of Afghan mountainside. And this time, everyone in the room believed it would hit its mark. The range sat 6 miles from FOB Atlas, carved into a mountain plateau at 8,100 feet elevation. The air was thinner here, colder despite the Afghan sun climbing toward noon. Kira stood at the firing line with her Barrett already assembled, the rifle resting on its bipod while she arranged her equipment with methodical precision. Colonel Brennan stood beside her, arms crossed, watching her prepare with the evaluating eye of someone who'd spent 40 years separating competent shooters from exceptional ones. He hadn't said much during the drive out, just studied the terrain and occasionally made notes in a small, weatherproof notebook that looked older than Kira herself. She pulled 3 different boxes of ammunition from her pack, each one labeled with handwritten data. Federal brass cases, 660-grain projectiles, but each box represented a different powder charge she'd tested across multiple temperature ranges. She set them on the shooting bench in order, then produced a digital scale accurate to .1 grains. You really do hand-load your own ammunition, Brennan observed. Yes, sir. Factory ammunition is good, but at extreme range, consistency matters more than anything else. A .2 grain variance in powder charge can mean a 3-inch difference in impact at 2,000 meters. She began weighing individual cartridges, setting aside the ones that fell outside her tolerance window. I weigh every round, measure every case, verify every crimp. Brennan nodded slowly. Your father did the same thing. Drove the other Marines crazy because he'd spend hours preparing ammunition while they were playing cards or writing letters home. He smiled at the memory. But when it came time to shoot, Trevor's rounds performed identically every single time. That consistency saved lives. Kira loaded 5 rounds into a magazine, each one selected from the batch that measured exactly 660 grains, no variance. She settled behind the Barrett, adjusting the bipod legs until the rifle sat perfectly level according to the bubble mounted on her scope. Through the optic, a steel silhouette stood at 2,000 meters, shimmering slightly in the afternoon heat. Wind? She asked. Brennan had already positioned himself with a spotting scope, 3 to 4 miles per hour, right to left. Mirage indicates it's consistent across the range. He paused, then added, but I'm reading it old school. What does your Kestrel say? Kira checked her electronic weather meter. 3.8 miles per hour, southwest. Temperature 68 degrees, humidity 32%, barometric pressure 25.7. Technology confirms what the land is telling us. That's the right way to do it. Brennan settled behind his spotting scope. Let's see what you and Trevor's rifle can do. Kira's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped from its resting 55 beats per minute down toward 50. The world narrowed to the scope picture, the reticle, the target 2,000 meters downrange. She made minute adjustments to her scope's windage turret, precise clicks that would translate to inches of movement at distance. The first shot cracked across the valley, the Barrett's distinctive report echoing off the surrounding mountains. The rifle's recoil drove back into her shoulder with massive force, but she'd positioned herself correctly, absorbed it through her body's structure rather than fighting it with muscle. She stayed in the scope, recovering quickly to watch the impact. 2.3 seconds later, the steel target rang with a clear metallic note that carried back to the firing line. "Center mass," Brennan reported, his voice carrying professional approval. "That's a hit." 4 more rounds followed over the next 3 minutes. Kira worked the Barrett's bolt between each shot, the heavy mechanism cycling smoothly. Each trigger press was the same, 4.5 pounds of pressure applied straight back until the sear released. Each follow-through was identical. Each recovery brought her back on target within seconds. When the 5th round impacted, Brennan pulled back from his spotting scope and looked at her with something approaching reverence. 5 for 5, all within a 6-inch group at 2,000 meters. That's exceptional shooting, Staff Sergeant. Kira pulled back from the rifle and made notes in her logbook. Temperature, wind, altitude, the exact performance of each round. Data was the foundation of consistency, and consistency was the foundation of success. "Most shooters would call that group good enough," Brennan continued. "Mission ready. Why keep testing?" "Because this isn't the ammunition I'll use for the shot on Hassan." Kira reached for the second box, began weighing rounds from a different batch. "I loaded these 3 months ago. Those were 6 months ago. Powder can degrade with age and temperature exposure. I need to confirm which batch performs best at this altitude and temperature." Brennan smiled, a genuine expression of approval. "You're more thorough than any shooter I've worked with." For the next 2 hours, she fired group after group, testing different ammunition lots, verifying her ballistic data at altitude, building an understanding of how her rifle and ammunition performed in conditions that matched the mission environment. 65 rounds total, each one logged, each result analyzed. Brennan provided observations throughout, but they weren't just win calls. He was teaching, sharing techniques that predated ballistic computers and laser rangefinders. "See that dust pattern at 1,500 meters? He pointed toward the valley floor. "The way it's swirling counterclockwise? That tells you there's a thermal current rising from the heated ground. Your computer can't see that, but it'll push your bullet up and right." He showed her how to read mirage, the heat shimmer that danced above the ground. "The mirage boils straight up when there's no wind, leans with the wind when there is. But watch how it changes at different distances. That's your wind gradient map, written by the land itself." Kira absorbed it all, her mind cataloging the information alongside her technical knowledge. Modern ballistic computers were incredible tools, but they had limitations. Batteries died, electronics failed. But reading the land the way Brennan did, that knowledge worked anywhere, anytime, with or without technology. "Your father and I spent 3 days in a hide site in Kuwait," Brennan said during a pause while Kira cleaned her rifle. "We didn't have kestrels or ballistic computers. We had a notebook, a calculator, and our eyes. We built wind maps by watching sand blow across the desert, calculated temperature effects by feeling how the air changed as the sun moved." He looked out across the Afghan mountains. "Modern soldiers forget that sometimes old ways work when new technology fails." "Will you teach me?" Kira asked. "The old ways, I mean. I know the technology, but I want to know what you and my father knew." Brennan's weathered face creased into a smile. "That's why I'm here, Staff Sergeant. That's exactly why I'm here." By the time the sun touched the western peaks, Kira had fired her last round and completed her final equipment checks. Her shoulder ached. 65 rounds through a Barrett M82 took a physical toll no matter how good your technique was, but she'd confirmed everything she needed to know. Her zero was perfect. Her ammunition performed consistently. Her ballistic data was verified at altitude. Most importantly, she'd begun to build the partnership with Brennan that would make the mission possible. A sniper and spotter weren't just two people working together. They were a weapons system, each component essential to the whole. They drove back to FOB Atlas as darkness settled over the mountains, the MRAP's headlights cutting tunnels through the gathering night. Brennan was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that existed between professionals who understood each other. "Can I ask you something personal, Colonel?" Kira finally said. "Call me Wyatt when we're alone. And yes, the Admiral said you retired 4 years ago. What made you come back?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark mountains. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "I have a son, had a son, Captain Nathaniel Brennan, Army Rangers. He was killed in Afghanistan in 2011. Kira felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry." He was 29 years old, West Point graduate, Ranger qualified, everything a father could want in a son. Brennan's jaw worked. "But I never trained him, never taught him the skills I'd spent a lifetime mastering. I was always busy, always deployed, always telling myself I'd have time later." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't have time later." They drove in silence for another minute before Brennan continued. "When Admiral Donovan called me, asked me to come back for this mission, I almost said no. I'm 67 years old. I'd earned my retirement, but then he mentioned it was for a precision strike, and something told me I needed to be here." He looked at Kira. "Watching you today, working with Trevor's daughter, teaching you what I should have taught my own son, maybe that's why I'm really here." Kira didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Sometimes silence was the right response. The Tactical Operations Center was climate-controlled and filled with the low hum of electronics when Kira and Brennan entered that evening. Master Chief Thatcher was waiting with meteorological data spread across multiple screens, the kind of comprehensive analysis that made modern operations possible. "Staff Sergeant, Colonel, I've pulled weather data from 3 sources." Thatcher gestured to the displays. "Military weather stations, local Afghan weather patterns from the past 30 days, and real-time satellite feeds." Kira studied the information, her mind already processing implications. Temperature variations by time of day, wind patterns that shifted as the sun heated the valley floor, barometric pressure trends that had been remarkably stable for the past 3 weeks. "The valley creates interesting conditions," Thatcher explained, pulling up a topographic overlay showing predicted airflow. "In the morning, as the sun heats the valley floor, you get thermal updrafts. They peak between 0800 and 1000 hours, which is exactly when Hassan does his morning prayers," Brennan noted. "Correct. So you'll have rising thermals pushing the bullet up and right, combined with the natural wind deflection." Thatcher zoomed in on the compound. "The good news is the weather's been stable. Clear conditions for 3 weeks straight. No storms forecast for the next 72 hours. Kira pulled out her notebook and began building calculations. The thermal currents would add complexity to an already difficult shot. She'd need to account for the bullet being pushed upward by rising air, calculate how much that would affect her holdover at 2,387 meters. Brennan leaned over her shoulder, watching her work. "What's your math telling you?" "Thermals will add approximately 0.8 MOA of vertical deflection. Combined with the wind," she ran through the calculations again, double-checking. "I'm looking at holding 18.2 MOA high for elevation, 4.8 MOA right for wind and thermal deflection. Plus, the Coriolis effect adds another 0.3 MOA right at this latitude." "Show me your wind map," Brennan said. Kira sketched quickly in her notebook, marking the compound, the hide site, and the terrain features between them. She annotated expected wind speeds at different distances, thermal current patterns, vegetation indicators she'd use to read real-time conditions. Brennan studied it, then made his own annotations. "Here, at 1,150 meters, there's a small ridge. Wind will accelerate over it, creating a Venturi effect. Add another half-minute of angle right through that section. He pointed to another feature. In this low area will trap cooler air in the morning. You might get a downdraft there that counteracts the thermal rise. They worked together for the next hour, building a comprehensive picture of what the bullet would encounter during its 3-second flight across the valley. It was part science, part art, part experience accumulated over decades. Master Chief Thatcher brought coffee at some point, the thick, military-issue stuff that tasted like it had been brewed in a diesel engine, but had enough caffeine to keep you alert. Kira drank it gratefully, her mind still processing variables. It was nearly 2,200 hours when Admiral Donovan entered the TOC. His face was serious, carrying news that shifted the mission timeline. Staff Sergeant, Colonel, I need to brief you on new intelligence. He pulled up a classified file on the secure terminal. Hassan al-Rashid's communications indicate he may be leaving the compound earlier than expected. Kira felt her pulse quicken, even as her expression remained neutral. How much earlier, sir? Our window just shrunk from 48 hours to approximately 30 hours. The mission needs to execute tomorrow morning instead of the day after. Donovan's eyes were apologetic but firm. That means limited prep time, no second reconnaissance, one chance to get it right. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We can work with that, Admiral. Donovan pulled up another file, and his expression grew heavier. There's something else. I've been cross-referencing Hassan's operational history against casualty reports from the past 15 years. He highlighted a document. Operation Enduring Thunder, 2011. The Ranger ambush I mentioned earlier. The file showed the casualty list. 4 names. 4 American warriors who hadn't come home. Brennan leaned forward to read, and Kira saw the exact moment recognition hit him. His face went pale. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. Captain Nathaniel Brennan, Donovan read quietly. I didn't make the connection until tonight when I was reviewing your service record, Colonel. I'm sorry. I had no idea Hassan was the one who planned the ambush that killed your son. The room fell into absolute silence. Brennan stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He walked to the far wall, his back to them, shoulders rigid with decades of military discipline fighting against a father's grief that had never fully healed. Kira looked at Admiral Donovan, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to follow. She moved quietly to stand beside Brennan, not touching, just present. I buried Nathaniel 12 years ago, Brennan said, his voice rough. Military funeral at Arlington, full honors. His mother couldn't stop crying. His wife was 3 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter he never got to meet. He took a shaking breath. I told myself I'd made peace with it, told myself he died serving his country, that it was honorable, that it meant something. It did mean something, Kira said quietly, but I never got to teach him. Brennan turned and Kira saw tears on his weathered cheeks. He deployed straight from Ranger School. I was in Iraq on another deployment. We kept missing each other. I kept thinking I'd have time later to pass on what I knew. The wind reading, the patience, how to survive in the mountains. His voice cracked. He died without learning what I could have taught him. He died, and I never got the chance to be the father and mentor he deserved. Kiera understood that guilt. She'd carried her own version since her father's death. The knowledge that she'd graduated sniper school months after he'd become too sick to attend the ceremony, that he'd died without seeing her earn the tab he'd prepared her for. Then help me make this shot, sir. She kept her voice gentle but firm. For Captain Brennan, for my father, for every American Hassan has taken from us. Brennan looked at her, and she saw him processing, saw the military discipline reasserting itself over grief. You sound like Trevor. He always knew what to say. Let me be the student you didn't get to train, Kira continued. Let me carry forward what you would have taught your son. That's how traditions survive. That's how their sacrifices stay meaningful. Brennan wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and straightened his shoulders. The transformation was visible. grief channeled into purpose, loss transmuted into motivation. All right, we continue, but we do this right. Perfect preparation, no mistakes, we owe them that. Admiral Donovan stepped forward. I wouldn't have assigned you to this mission if I'd known the personal connection, Colonel. If you need to step back— No, sir. Brennan's voice was firm now, steady. I'm exactly where I need to be. For Nathaniel, for Trevor, for every name on that casualty list. He looked at Kira. We have 30 hours. Let's make them count. The MRAP convoy departed FOB Atlas at 0300 hours, driving without lights through mountain passes that dropped away into darkness on both sides. Kira sat in the back with Brennan, both of them silent, mentally preparing for what came next. Lieutenant Commander Merrick's SEAL team provided security. 8 operators in full kit, night vision mounted, weapons ready. They'd studied satellite imagery of the route, planned primary and alternate extraction points, rehearsed actions on contact. But no plan survived first contact with reality, and these mountains had been killing soldiers for thousands of years. Overconfidence here was a death sentence. The drive took 2 hours, following valleys and ridgelines, avoiding known Taliban positions and areas where IEDs had been found before. The sky was still dark when they stopped 3 kilometers from their objective. Last 1,000 meters on foot, Merrick whispered, his voice barely audible even in the quiet night. Stick to the route we planned. Watch for tripwires. Stay quiet. They moved in tactical file, night vision turning the world into shades of green. Kira carried her Barrett in its drag bag, the weight distributed across her shoulders and back. 65 pounds of rifle, optic, and ammunition. Brennan moved beside her, carrying the spotting scope and support equipment. For a 67-year-old man, he moved with surprising grace, each footstep placed carefully, his breathing controlled. They were 100 meters from the planned hide site when Brennan's fist came up, the signal for immediate halt. Everyone froze instantly, becoming statues in the darkness. Kira heard it a second later. Voices, speaking Pashto, moving along the ridge above their position. Taliban patrol. 6 fighters visible through night vision, moving along a trail that would bring them within 30 meters of the SEAL team's position if they continued. Merrick's hand signals were clear. Go prone, weapons ready, prepare to engage if compromised. The team melted into the ground, becoming part of the landscape, fingers on triggers, but discipline holding. The patrol moved closer. 25 meters. 20. 15. Kira's heart rate was 52 beats per minute, elevated from exertion, but still controlled. Beside her, Brennan was absolutely motionless, not even appearing to breathe. Old field craft from decades of operations in hostile territory. One of the Taliban fighters stopped, looking directly toward their position. He said something to his companions, gestured with his rifle. Kira's finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger of her M4 carbine. If shooting started, she'd engage the closest threat first, trust the SEALs to handle the others. 18 minutes. That's how long the team stayed frozen while the patrol lingered, talking, smoking cigarettes, completely unaware that 8 American operators and 1 Army sniper were within spitting distance. Finally, the fighters moved on, their voices fading into the night. Merrick waited another 10 minutes before signaling movement. When they finally reached the hide site, Kiara's muscles ached from the prolonged tension, but her mind was clear, focused. Dawn was still 2 hours away when Brennan and Kira low-crawled the final 50 meters to their shooting position. The hide site was a rocky depression with sparse vegetation, barely large enough for 2 people lying prone, but it had a perfect line of sight across the valley to the compound where Hassan al-Rashid would appear in approximately 4 hours. Kira pulled out her laser rangefinder, painted the balcony where intelligence said Hassan performed his morning prayers. The display read, 2,387 meters. Confirmed, Brennan whispered, reading the same measurement through his spotting scope. 2,387 meters, just like the satellite imagery showed. They spent the next hour arranging equipment with obsessive precision. The Barrett positioned on its bipod with the bubble level confirming it was perfectly horizontal. Kira's ballistic computer within easy reach. The rangefinder. 5 rounds of her best ammunition, each one weighed and verified. Brennan's spotting scope positioned 2 feet behind and slightly left, giving him a complimentary view of the target area. As false dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Brennan pointed out terrain features. See those prayer flags at 1,150 meters? Watch how they move. That's your primary wind indicator. He traced an imaginary line through the air. The dust near that building at 1,600 meters shows thermal currents. Those trees at 800 will tell you if the wind shifts. This was the education Kira had asked for. Reading the land the way snipers had done before technology. The kind of knowledge that couldn't be taught in a classroom. This valley behaves like Kuwait deserts, Brennan continued quietly. Same heat patterns, same wind evolution as the sun rises. I've seen it before. They watched the compound emerge from darkness as dawn broke. Guards became visible on the perimeter, walking predictable patrol routes. Vehicles sat in the courtyard, 2 Toyota trucks with PKM machine guns mounted in the beds. The balcony was empty but clear, the exact position where intelligence said Hassan would appear. At 0630, movement on the balcony made Kira's finger move toward the trigger guard, but Brennan's hand touched her shoulder lightly. Guards checking the area, not our target. 2 Taliban fighters stepped onto the balcony, scanned the surrounding mountains with binoculars. One of them looked directly toward the hide site, and Kira forced herself to remain absolutely still. At this distance, with their camouflage and position, they were effectively invisible. But movement would give them away instantly. The guards completed their sweep and withdrew inside. 90 minutes, Brennan whispered. He'll come between 0730 and 0745 based on the pattern. Kira began her final mental preparation. The calculations were done. The equipment was ready. Now it was about mental state, achieving the clarity that made impossible shots possible. Her breathing slowed to 6 breaths per minute. Her heart rate dropped to 48. The world narrowed to the scope picture, the wind indicators, the mathematics of death delivered at extreme range. At 0715, the wind picked up suddenly. Kira felt it on her face before the indicators showed it. A shift from southwest to west-southwest, the speed increasing from 3 miles per hour to 7, gusting higher. Wind change, Brennan confirmed, his Kestrel weather meter reading the shift. 7 to 8 miles per hour now, west-southwest, 15-degree direction change. Kira's carefully prepared calculations were suddenly invalid. The wind shift changed everything. Deflection, drift, the complex interaction of air currents along the bullet's path. She had 15 minutes, maybe 20, before the expected target window. She pulled out her notebook, began running new calculations. Her hands were steady, her mind processing rapidly. 2,387 meters. New wind speed 7.8 miles per hour. New direction west-southwest instead of southwest. Temperature had risen to 64 degrees. Humidity dropped to 41%. Brennan provided real-time observations. Prayer flags showing steady 8 miles per hour. Dust pattern confirms west-southwest. Mirage indicates thermals are rising strong, stronger than yesterday. New solution, hold 4.8 MOA right for wind instead of her previous 2.5. The difference was massive at this range, nearly 5 feet of deviation if she used the wrong calculation. Your computer's showing 4.6 MOA, Brennan said, reading over her shoulder. My eyes say 5.0. Kira looked at him. Split the difference? 4.8. Trust the average when technology and fieldcraft disagree. She made the adjustment, clicking her scope's windage turret. Each click was precise, mechanical, moving her point of impact exactly where it needed to be. At 0734, the balcony door opened. 3 men emerged. two guards flanking a central figure. But the central figure wasn't Hassan. Kira's finger stayed off the trigger, her discipline absolute. Through the scope, she compared the man's features to the intelligence photographs burned into her memory. Wrong build, wrong beard pattern. This was a local Taliban sub-commander, someone important, but not their target. The men performed morning prayers, then withdrew inside after 3 minutes. Brennan's voice was calm, steady. Not him. Patience. Wait for positive identification. Kira's shoulder was beginning to ache from maintaining position. 45 minutes prone behind the Barrett, muscles locked in place, breathing controlled. But pain was just information, and she had the discipline to ignore it. At 07:38, the door opened again. Two guards stepped out, checked the perimeter, spoke into radios. They withdrew without anyone else appearing. False alarm number 2. He's being cautious, Brennan observed, sending people out first to check for threats. Smart, Kira replied. Smart men are harder to kill, but not impossible. At 07:41, the balcony door opened a third time. Two guards emerged first, taking positions flanking the doorway. Then a third figure stepped out between them, moving with the confidence of command. He wore traditional Afghan clothing, a distinctive beard visible even at this distance. Kira's crosshairs settled on him as he walked to the balcony railing. Through the scope, she compared every feature to the intelligence photographs. Beard pattern matched. Build matched. The way he carried himself matched. Height estimated at 5'10", matching the intelligence profile. Positive identification, Brennan breathed. That's Hassan al-Rashid. Hassan faced east, preparing for morning prayers. The guards positioned themselves back into the sides, leaving a clear line of fire. 90 seconds. That's all the intelligence said they'd have. 90 seconds from appearance to withdrawal. Wind holding 7.8 miles per hour. West-southwest, Brennan called, his voice barely above a whisper. Thermals rising consistent. Mirage stable. Range unchanged, 2,387 meters. He paused, then added quietly, You have the green light. For Trevor. For Nathaniel. Send it when ready. Kira's final mental checklist ran in seconds. Range confirmed. Elevation 18.2 MOA for the downward angle and distance. Wind 4.8 MOA right for deflection. Temperature 64 degrees. Humidity 41%. Barometric pressure 25.86. Coriolis effect 3.3 inches at this latitude. All variables accounted for, calculated, integrated into her hold. Her breathing slowed further. 6 breaths per minute. Her heart rate dropped to 48 beats per minute. The crosshairs settled high and right of Hassan's chest. 18.2 mils above, 4.8 mils right. Trusting mathematics and physics and decades of accumulated wisdom from the men who taught her. Through the scope, Hassan appeared tiny across the vast distance. A human being reduced to a silhouette, a target, a problem to be solved with precision and will. But he wasn't just a target. He was the man who'd planned the ambush that killed Nathaniel Brennan, who'd built the IED network that killed 17 Americans, who'd orchestrated attacks that brought grief to families who'd never asked for war, but bore its cost anyway. Kira's finger took up the trigger slack. 3 pounds of pressure. 4 pounds. Focus. Absolute. The world existed only in the scope picture now. Crosshairs. Target. Wind indicators. The mathematics of justice. For her father who'd taught her to shoot. For Nathaniel Brennan who died without learning his father's skills. For every name on casualty lists that stretch back decades. For the tradition of warriors who protected those who couldn't protect themselves. The trigger broke clean at 4.5 pounds. The Barrett erupted with massive recoil that drove into her shoulder, but she'd positioned correctly, absorbed it through skeletal structure. The pain flared hot in her damaged shoulder joint, but she stayed in the scope through discipline and will, watching, waiting. The muzzle blast echoed across the valley like thunder. 3.2 seconds. That's how long the bullet had to fly. Leaving the muzzle at 2,710 feet per second, arcing upward through thin mountain air, reaching the apex of its trajectory, then descending toward the target 2,387 meters away. Wind pushed it right, 4.8 MOA of drift. Gravity pulled it down, 18.2 MOA of drop. The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation added microscopic deflection. Thermals from the valley floor created updrafts. All of Kira's calculations, all of Brennan's observations, all the preparation and training and dedication compressed into those 3.2 seconds. Brennan watched through his spotting scope, his voice steady. Flight looks good. Tracking. The bullet descended toward Hassan al-Rashid, who had no idea that death was traveling toward him at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, that the judgment of nations was about to arrive with precision measured in inches. Impact. Hassan's chest exploded in red mist. The massive hydrostatic shock from the .50 caliber round threw him backward off his feet. One moment he was standing at the balcony railing, the next he was gone, simply erased from the fight with the finality that only a perfect shot delivered. The guards froze in confusion, their minds unable to process what had just happened. One looked down at Hassan's body. The other spun, searching for the threat, his rifle sweeping the mountains but finding nothing. Brennan's voice cracked with emotion for the first time in the mission. "Center mass! Confirmed kill! Target down!" Then, barely audible, "For Nathaniel." The compound erupted into chaos. Guards ran in every direction. Someone fired an AK blindly into the mountains. An RPG launcher appeared, fired a rocket at empty terrain 400 meters from Kira's position. Radio chatter panicked, disorganized, the sound of an organization whose head had just been surgically removed. Kira chambered a second round, the Barrett's bolt cycling smoothly. She stayed in position, scanning for additional threats. Mission wasn't over until they were extracted safely. Brennan keyed his radio. "Overwatch to assault actual. Primary target neutralized. Compound in disarray. Defenders disorganized. You are cleared hot for assault." 3 kilometers away, 2 Black Hawk helicopters lifted off, carrying Lieutenant Commander Merrick's SEAL team toward the compound for the follow-on assault. The plan was simple now that Hassan was dead. Fast rope onto the roof, breach and clear, capture the secondary commanders and seize intelligence materials. But as the helicopters approached, a PKM machine gun opened fire from a rooftop position that hadn't been visible in the initial reconnaissance. Heavy caliber rounds stitched through the air, tracers marking paths toward the Blackhawks. Merrick's urgent voice came over the radio. Taking fire! PKM rooftop position." Brennan spotted it through his scope. Rooftop gun, 2,250 meters, 11 o'clock from your last shot. Kira swung the Barrett left, acquiring the new target. A fighter behind a PKM machine gun, pouring fire at the approaching helicopters. No time for careful calculation. No time for detailed wind analysis. Just instinct and experience and trust in the fundamentals her father had taught her when she was 8 years old. Brennan's call was rapid. Estimate 2,250 meters, same wind, less drop. Hold 16 MOA high, 4.5 MOA right. Kira adjusted, aimed, fired. 8 seconds from target identification to shot. The Barrett roared again. The PKM gunner jerked backward, hit center mass, the machine gun falling silent. "Target down," Brennan confirmed. "PKM neutralized." The Blackhawks swept in, SEALs fast roping onto the compound roof. Merrick's team moved with practiced precision, breaching doors, clearing rooms. The fight was brief and violent. Defenders who'd been disorganized by Hassan's death either surrendered or died in quick exchanges of gunfire. "Compound secure," Merrick's voice came through clearly now. Hassan confirmed KIA, 2 secondary commanders captured, intel materials being collected, 0 SEAL casualties. A pause, then, outstanding Overwatch, Phantom, best I've ever seen. Kira and Brennan remained on position for 20 more minutes, providing cover while the SEALs exploited the target. Only when Merrick confirmed they were ready for extraction did Kira finally pull back from her rifle. Her shoulder throbbed with deep pain that would require medication and ice as soon as they returned to base. But the mission was complete. Hassan al-Rashid would never kill another American, never plan another ambush, never build another IED network. Brennan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, respect, but also something else. Peace, maybe, the kind that came from completing something that needed completing. 2 perfect shots under impossible conditions, he said quietly. Your father would be proud. I'm proud. Kira smiled, genuine and warm despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. We made it count, didn't we? We did. Brennan looked out across the valley toward the compound where his son's killer had just paid the final price. We really did. They broke down their equipment as the sun climbed higher, turning the Afghan mountains gold and bronze. The Black Hawk extraction lifted them out 90 minutes later, carrying them back toward FOB Atlas and whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, the mission was complete. The shot was made, the debt was paid. And somewhere, Kira thought, her father and Nathaniel Brennan were watching, making sure they didn't miss. They hadn't missed. They never would. The Black Hawk touched down at FOB Atlas just after 1100 hours, rotor wash kicking up a wall of dust that turned the landing zone briefly opaque. Kira stepped off with her rifle case secured across her back, every muscle in her body registering the protest of 5 hours in a prone position, followed by tactical movement under load. Her right shoulder throbbed with a deep ache that came from absorbing repeated Barrett recoil against damaged tissue. But she kept her face neutral, her bearing professional. Brennan moved beside her, and despite being 40 years her senior, he showed less physical strain than she felt. Decades of hard living had either broken him or made him resilient enough that discomfort barely registered anymore. Probably both. What Kira wasn't prepared for was the reception waiting beyond the landing zone. The entire task force had assembled. Admiral Donovan stood at the front, flanked by Master Chief Thatcher and Lieutenant Commander Merrick, whose uniform still showed dust from the compound assault. Behind them, at least 40 SEALs and support personnel stood in loose formation, faces turned toward the helicopter. As Kira cleared the rotor wash and became fully visible, Admiral Donovan began to clap. The sound was taken up immediately by every person present, a thunderous applause that echoed off the HESCO barriers and reinforced buildings. Kira stopped mid-step, genuinely surprised. Snipers worked in shadows, their successes measured in lives saved rather than public recognition. This kind of acknowledgement felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. But she read the faces of the men applauding, saw the genuine respect there, and understood. This wasn't about her. This was about the mission, about Hassan al-Rashid being erased from the fight, about American warriors coming home alive because the shot had been perfect. Brennan touched her elbow lightly, a small gesture of encouragement, and they walked forward together. Admiral Donovan waited until the applause died down, then addressed the assembled task force with the command voice that had shaped his 40-year career. Gather around, all of you. What happened today deserves to be acknowledged. The crowd tightened, SEALs moving closer, support personnel finding sightlines. The Afghan sun beat down on them, but nobody moved to find shade. 48 hours ago, Donovan began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled group, I stood in a briefing room and questioned whether Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford belonged on this mission. I looked at her uniform, her rank, her service branch, and I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. He paused, and Kira saw something rare in a flag officer, public admission of error. I almost made the biggest mistake of my career. I almost turned away one of the finest shooters I've ever encountered because I judged her by everything except what actually matters. Her skill, her dedication, her courage under fire. Donovan turned to face Kira directly. This morning, Staff Sergeant Ashford made a shot that most marksmen would consider impossible. 2,387 meters across difficult terrain, in variable wind conditions, with thermal currents, at a steep downward angle. One shot, one kill. The target was eliminated with precision that defies statistical probability. He gestured toward Merrick. The follow-on assault was successful. We captured 2 additional high-value targets along with significant intelligence materials. Most importantly, every member of the assault team came home alive. The weight of that last statement settled over the group. In a profession where casualty lists were part of the reality, bringing everyone home was the highest measure of success. Donovan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small case. Opening it revealed a challenge coin, the task force's commemorative token, given only for exceptional valor and performance. The coin bore the seal trident on one side, the task force designation on the other, and represented acceptance into a brotherhood that transcended service branch or rank. Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford, on behalf of this task force and the United States Naval Special Warfare Command, I present you with this coin in recognition of extraordinary marksmanship and professionalism in combat operations. Kira accepted the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. It was just metal, just a token, but it represented something deeper. Respect earned through performance. Recognition that capability mattered more than assumptions. "Thank you, Admiral," she said, her voice steady. "But I was just doing my job." Colonel Brennan's wind calls were perfect. The assault team executed flawlessly. The intelligence preparation was thorough. This was a team effort. "That's exactly what makes you exceptional," Donovan replied. "You understand that no one succeeds alone." He turned to address the group again. "But make no mistake, that shot was hers, and it was magnificent." Lieutenant Commander Merrick stepped forward, and Kira noticed his earlier skepticism had been completely erased, replaced by the professional respect of one warrior for another. "Staff Sergeant, Kira, my team wants you to know we've worked with a lot of snipers over the years. What you did today was the best Overwatch support we've ever received. You gave us the confidence to execute our assault, knowing you had our backs." Master Chief Thatcher added his voice, the gravelly tone of someone who'd seen 3 decades of combat operations. "In 22 years as a SEAL, I've learned that capability doesn't care about gender, service branch, or rank. It only cares about skill and heart. You've got both in abundance, Phantom. It's been an honor." One by one, the SEALs approached. Some shook her hand. Some asked questions about the shot, genuine professional curiosity about technique and calculation. Others simply offered their respect with a nod or a brief word. The initial resistance she'd faced 48 hours ago had transformed into authentic admiration. But it was Donovan's next gesture that truly surprised her. He turned to Brennan, produced a second challenge coin from his pocket, and his voice took on additional weight. "Colonel Wyatt Brennan, I called you out of retirement because I needed the best wind reader in the business. But you gave us something more valuable than meteorological expertise." Donovan's eyes held genuine emotion. "You passed the torch. You took the knowledge of 35 years in combat and transferred it to the next generation. You proved that tradition and innovation aren't enemies, they're partners." He extended the coin. "For 35 years of service, from Desert Storm to Afghanistan. For being the mentor we needed, even more than the spotter. Welcome home, Granite." Brennan accepted the coin with a hand that trembled slightly. He came to attention despite being in civilian clothes, rendered a perfect salute to the Admiral. Donovan returned it with equal precision. When Brennan's hand came down, Kira saw tears tracking through the dust on his weathered face. This wasn't just about the mission for him. This was closure. This was the debt to his son partially repaid. The knowledge he'd never gotten to pass to Nathaniel, instead given to Trevor Ashford's daughter. The assembly began to disperse as operators returned to their duties, but individuals continued to approach. A young SEAL lieutenant wanted to know about her ballistic calculations. A master chief asked about her ammunition loading process. Each conversation was professional, curious, devoid of the condescension or skepticism that had colored the initial briefing. Then Kira noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A young woman in Army multicam, specialist rank, moving forward with visible nervousness. She was maybe 23, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, face sunburned from field time. Her name tape read Sinclair. The specialist approached hesitantly, stopped a respectful distance away. "Staff Sergeant Ashford, I'm sorry to bother you." Her voice wavered slightly, then strengthened. "I'm Specialist Harper Sinclair. I'm with the infantry unit that provides base security here." "Not a bother, Specialist. What can I do for you?" Harper took a breath, and the words came out in a rush. "I'm trying to get into sniper school. I put in 3 applications, but everyone keeps telling me women can't handle it, that we don't have the physical strength for the rifle, that we don't belong in precision shooting roles." Her eyes were fierce despite the uncertainty in her voice. "Seeing what you did today, hearing how you earned respect from Navy SEALs through pure skill, it means everything to me. You proved it's possible." Before Kira could respond, Brennan stepped forward. His voice carried the authority of age and experience, the kind that made people listen instinctively. "Specialist Sinclair, I'm 67 years old. I've served since 1978. I fought in Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan." He paused, making sure she was listening. "I spent most of my career thinking certain things about who belongs in combat roles, about physical requirements and traditional expectations." He gestured to Kira. "This soldier just proved that skill, courage, and heart don't care about gender or age. They care about excellence, about preparation, about will." His voice softened slightly. "If you want to be a sniper, here's what you do. Work harder than everyone else. Master your fundamentals. Find a mentor who'll teach you properly. Honor the tradition. The rest will follow." Kira added her voice. "And remember, Specialist, you're not proving something to them. You're building a legacy for those who come after you. Every standard you exceed, every shot you make, you're opening doors." Harper's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back, maintaining military bearing. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Colonel, I won't let you down." "You won't let yourself down," Kira corrected gently. "That's what matters." As Harper moved away, walking taller than when she'd approached, Brennan spoke quietly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just the missions, the legacy we pass forward." "Yes, sir. That's exactly what it's about." The equipment room was quiet that evening, climate-controlled and isolated from the base's ambient noise. Kira sat on a metal stool with her Barrett disassembled on the cleaning mat before her, running a bore brush through the barrel with methodical precision. 67 rounds through the weapon in 2 days, 65 at the range, 2 in combat. Each one had to be accounted for through proper maintenance. Brennan entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, the thick military issue that tasted like diesel fuel, but delivered caffeine like a tactical airstrike. He set one beside her and settled onto a nearby equipment crate, watching her work. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the quiet companionship of professionals who'd shared something significant. The Barrett's components gleamed under fluorescent lights as Kira cleaned each one, checking for wear, verifying function. "Best spotting I've done in 35 years, Brennan finally said. "Best shooting I've ever witnessed. Best mentoring I've ever received, Wyatt." More silence, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things that didn't need saying. Mutual respect, shared purpose, the understanding between warriors who'd accomplished something that mattered. Brennan pulled out his Desert Storm logbook from his jacket pocket. The leather cover was worn smooth, water-stained, scarred by decades of field use. He opened it to the last page, where new writing appeared in Kira's precise handwriting. February 23rd, 2023, Afghanistan, Hassan al-Rashid, 2,387 meters. Wind 7.8 miles per hour, west-southwest. Temperature 64 degrees Fahrenheit. One round, center mass. Below it, both their signatures. SSGK Ashford, Phantom, / Colonel W. Brennan, Granite. Brennan traced the entry with his finger, then looked up at Kira. This belongs to you now. He pushed the logbook across the table between them. Kira's hands paused on the rifle barrel. Wyatt, I can't take that. It's your history, It's our history now. Trevor's rifle, my logbook, your legacy. His voice was firm but gentle. That's how traditions survive, through passing knowledge forward, through ensuring the next generation carries what we've learned. She set down the bore brush and picked up the logbook, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical weight of leather and paper, but the weight of 35 years of shots, of lives saved, of missions accomplished. Every page represented a moment when someone's skill had made the difference between success and failure, life and death. Add your future shots to it, Brennan continued. Every mission, every range session that matters. Build on what I've started. Then someday, when you're 67 and there's another young shooter who needs guidance, you pass it to them. He smiled. Maybe that specialist Sinclair. She's got the fire for it. Kira opened the logbook to the first page. Desert Storm, 1991. A shot in Kuwait, 1,600 meters, confirmed kill. She flipped through the years, seeing Brennan's handwriting evolve slightly, seeing operations in Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, seeing the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime dedicated to a very specific craft. I came back thinking this mission was about revenge for Nathaniel, Brennan said quietly, about finally getting Hassan for what he did to my son. Wasn't it? Maybe partly, but that's not what I found here. He looked directly at her. I found out that what we sacrificed, what Nathaniel sacrificed, what Trevor sacrificed, it wasn't for nothing. You're proof that the tradition continues. Better, stronger. Kira felt her throat tighten with emotion she normally kept disciplined and controlled. You gave me the gift your son never got, the chance to learn from a master. I'll honor that, Wyatt. Every shot I take for the rest of my career. They shook hands across the table, the grip firm, sustained, communicating what words couldn't quite capture. The door to the equipment room opened, and Admiral Donovan entered. He'd changed from his duty uniform to more casual attire, but his bearing remained unmistakably command level. Staff Sergeant, Colonel, I wanted to catch you before you ship out tomorrow. He pulled up a stool, making the moment informal despite his rank. I just got off a secure call with JSOC. They wanted to know how the mission went. And what did you tell them, sir? Kira asked. I told them the truth, that I almost screwed up by requesting a different shooter, that command sent me exactly who I needed, and I was too blind to see it initially. Donovan's expression was serious. I also told them that if I ever have another mission requiring precision shooting at extreme range, I'll be requesting you specifically. Not because you're Phantom, because you're professional, thorough, and you get results. He turned to Brennan, and I told them that calling you back was the best tactical decision I've made in years, not just for the wind reading, but for the mentorship. We're losing institutional knowledge as the old guard retires. You proved we need to bridge that gap better. I appreciate that, Admiral, but I'm still retired after this, Brennan said with a slight smile. One mission was perfect. Let's not push my luck or my aging joints. Donovan nodded, understanding. Fair enough. But if you're ever willing to do some instructor work, teach the next generation your techniques, the door's open. They talked for another 30 minutes about the mission's broader implications, about the intelligence materials seized from the compound, about how Hassan's death would disrupt Taliban operations across 3 provinces. Professional discussion among warriors who understood the strategic picture. Finally, Donovan stood to leave. He paused at the door, looked back at Kira. "My godson Preston called me this afternoon. He heard through channels that you were here, that you were the shooter on this mission." Donovan's voice grew thick. "He wanted me to tell you that his daughter just turned 2 years old, that she's healthy and happy and learning to talk, that he gets to be there for all of it because 18 months ago, you made 6 impossible shots in 12 seconds. He straightened, came briefly to attention, rendered a salute that was completely informal and entirely heartfelt. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant, from a godfather and from everyone who loves the people you brought home safe." Kira returned the salute, feeling the weight of it. This was why she did the work, not for medals or recognition, but for moments like this, for children who got to know their fathers, for families that stayed whole, for the warriors who went into harm's way knowing someone had their backs. After Donovan left, Kira finished cleaning her rifle in silence. Each component was inspected, lubricated, reassembled with care. The Barrett M82 had spoken twice today with perfect precision, and it deserved the respect of proper maintenance. When she finally secured the rifle in its case, Brennan was still there, having watched the entire process without speaking. "Wyatt, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you have peace now? About Nathaniel?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I don't know if peace is the right word. I'll always carry grief that I didn't teach him, didn't prepare him the way I should have, but..." He gestured to the logbook now in Kira's possession. "Watching you work, seeing the tradition continue through Trevor's daughter, knowing that what I know isn't lost. Yeah, maybe that's a kind of peace." He stood, stretched, his joints audibly protesting. "Nathaniel would be 34 this month. I like to think he'd approve of this. His old man coming back for one last mission, helping eliminate the man who killed him, passing knowledge forward so other young warriors are better prepared." He smiled. "Yeah, I think he'd approve." Kira stood as well, shouldering her rifle case. Tomorrow she'd be on a transport back to Fort Benning, back to her normal duties, back to the routine of military life between deployments. But something had changed in the past 72 hours. She'd gained a mentor, proved herself to skeptics, and accepted the responsibility of carrying forward a tradition that stretched back decades. "Get some sleep, Wyatt. Long flight tomorrow." "You too, Kira. And thank you." "For what?" "For letting an old warrior feel useful again. For giving me a reason to believe the skills we've spent our lives mastering won't die with our generation." He headed for the door, then paused. "Your father would be proud. Never forget that." After he left, Kira sat alone in the quiet equipment room with her father's rifle and Brennan's logbook. She opened the logbook to a blank page near the end, uncapped her pen, and began to write. Not just the technical data from today's shot, but a note, a promise. "To Dad and Nathaniel Brennan, the tradition continues. The knowledge passes forward. The legacy lives. We will not let it die. We will honor what you started by teaching those who come after us. This is my oath. Kira Ashford, Phantom." She closed the logbook, placed it carefully in her pack beside the photograph of her father that had traveled with her to every deployment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she'd earned rest. The C-130 transport that carried Kira away from Afghanistan 2 days later was as uncomfortable as the one that had brought her, but the discomfort barely registered. She spent the flight reviewing mission notes, adding details to Brennan's logbook, and thinking about Specialist Harper Sinclair. The young woman had approached her again before departure, asking for advice on preparing for sniper school. Kira had spent an hour with her, sharing training techniques, recommending resources, offering the kind of guidance she wished she'd had at that age. "Stay in touch," Kira had told her. "Email me your training progress. Ask questions when you need help. That's how this works. Those who've walked the path helping those who are starting the journey." Harper had promised she would. her determination visible in every line of her body. The plane landed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany for refueling. During the layover, Kira found a quiet corner and pulled out her laptop. She composed an email to Harper, attaching a training program focused on fundamentals: breathing, trigger control, position, the building blocks that every great shooter mastered before attempting anything advanced. She also forwarded the email to 3 other female soldiers she knew who were interested in sniper training. Building a network, creating a support structure, ensuring that others wouldn't face the same isolation and skepticism that had marked her early career. The final leg of the flight took her across the Atlantic, landing at Dover Air Force Base before a military bus carried her back to Fort Benning. She arrived at her barracks room 48 hours after leaving Afghanistan, exhausted but satisfied. Her phone had multiple messages waiting, one from Admiral Donovan thanking her again and confirming he'd submitted her name for a Bronze Star. One from Brennan asking her to call when she settled in. Several from other snipers she knew who'd heard through informal channels about the shot and wanted details. But the one that made her smile was from an unknown number with an international prefix. She opened it. SSG, Ashford, this is Harper Sinclair. I just completed my first week of intensive training using the program you sent. My groupings improved by 40%. Thank you for believing in me. I won't let you down. HS. Kira typed a quick response. You're not letting me down. You're building yourself up. Keep working. The results will come. KA. She set the phone aside and unpacked her gear. The Barrett went into her weapons locker after another detailed cleaning. The logbook went into her desk drawer where she could access it daily. The challenge coin from Admiral Donovan's task force joined the small collection of coins and mementos she'd accumulated over 5 years of deployments. That night, she slept deeply for the first time in weeks, her body finally releasing the tension of mission preparation and execution. 3 weeks later, she was back in her normal rotation: range time, physical training, equipment maintenance, the rhythm of military life between deployments. Her shoulder required daily physical therapy, the damaged tissue slowly degrading despite her best efforts. The doctor's assessment hadn't changed: 2 to 3 years before mandatory medical retirement. But those 2 to 3 years would be productive. She'd already been contacted by the Special Operations Sniper School about potential instructor positions. They wanted her to teach advanced, long-range shooting, to pass her techniques to the next generation of precision shooters. She'd also received approval to write a technical manual on extreme-range shooting in mountainous terrain, something that would outlive her active service and provide guidance to snipers deploying to environments like Afghanistan. 4 months after the mission, a package arrived at Fort Benning with Brennan's return address. Inside was a photograph: Brennan standing with Nathaniel in uniform, both of them smiling, taken during Nathaniel's Ranger School graduation. On the back, Brennan had written, "For your logbook, so you remember why the tradition matters. Wyatt." Kira placed the photograph in Brennan's logbook on the page that documented Hassan's elimination. The symbolism was clear: past and future connected, sacrifice and honor linked, the continuous thread of warriors who serve something larger than themselves. She called Brennan that evening. They talked for an hour about nothing in particular: his retirement activities, her training schedule, the ongoing insurgency in Afghanistan. But the subtext was clear in every word. The bond forged during those 72 hours remained strong. Harper Sinclair applied to sniper school again, Kira mentioned toward the end of the call. Used me as a reference. Think she'll make it? If she keeps working the way she has been, absolutely. She's got the discipline and the hunger. Good. Brennan was quiet for a moment. You're doing what I should have done with Nathaniel. Building mentorship relationships early, sharing knowledge generously. That's how we prevent the next generation from learning through unnecessary mistakes. I learned from the best, Kira replied. 3 years later, in 2026, Kira sat in an interview room at Fort Benning's sniper training facility. Across from her sat Harper Sinclair, now a staff sergeant herself, wearing the sniper tab she'd earned 18 months earlier. Harper was filming a documentary about women in special operations, and she'd asked Kira to share the story of the Afghanistan mission. "They say you made the impossible shot with a legend from Desert Storm," Harper began, her voice confident now, shaped by years of experience and accomplishment. "How did it happen?" Kira smiled, touched the Barrett case that sat beside her desk, and began to speak. She told the story honestly, the initial skepticism, Brennan's arrival, the recognition of her father's rifle, the mission preparation, the shot itself. She didn't embellish or minimize, just the truth of what had happened when skill met preparation, met opportunity. "But the shot itself isn't the most important part of the story," Kira said as she neared the end. "The most important part is what Colonel Brennan taught me. Not just the wind reading or the old school techniques, but the understanding that we're part of a continuous tradition." She pulled out the logbook, now thicker with added pages, documenting 3 more years of missions in range sessions. Harper's name appeared in several entries, training sessions where Kira had mentored her, passed forward what Brennan had taught. "What happened to Colonel Brennan?" Harper asked. Kira's smile faded slightly. "He retired again 6 months after the mission, lived quietly in Montana, passed away 2 years ago in his sleep. Peaceful, at home, surrounded by family. Did he know his legacy would continue?" "He knew." Kira opened the logbook to show Harper the entries. "Because before he died, I sent him updates. Every time I taught a class, every time I mentored a young shooter, every time someone like you succeeded in earning the tab, I made sure he knew the knowledge wasn't lost." Harper leaned forward, studying the logbook with reverence. "And now you're passing it to me?" "Not yet. You're still building your own entries," Kira smiled. "But someday, when you're ready, when you've added your own missions and wisdom to these pages, then yes, you'll pass it forward to whoever comes after you." She closed the logbook and met Harper's eyes. "That's what this is really about. Not individual shots or missions, but the unbroken chain of warriors who honor the tradition by teaching the next generation. My father taught me, Brennan taught me, I taught you. You'll teach the next one." Harper nodded slowly. "The tradition doesn't die as long as we pass it on." "Exactly." The interview concluded shortly after. As Harper packed up her equipment, she paused at the door. "Thank you, Kira, for everything, for believing in me when others didn't, for showing me what was possible, for teaching me the right way. Thank you for having the courage to push through when everyone said you couldn't. You proved them wrong the same way I did, through excellence that couldn't be denied." After Harper left, Kira sat alone in her office. Her shoulder throbbed with the constant pain that had become her companion, a reminder that her time in active service was measured now in months rather than years. Medical retirement was coming, inevitable as gravity. But she'd accomplished what mattered. The knowledge had been passed forward. Young shooters like Harper would carry the tradition into the next generation. The lessons purchased through decades of experience wouldn't be lost. She walked to her window and looked out across the Fort Benning sniper range. Young soldiers were training there, practicing fundamentals, building the skills that might save their lives or their teammates' lives in future conflicts. Somewhere among them might be the next Phantom, the next shooter who'd make an impossible shot when everything depended on it, the next warrior who'd prove that capability transcended assumptions and prejudice. Kira touched the photograph of her father that she still kept in her pocket during every deployment, every mission, every important moment. She thought of Brennan in his Montana home, peaceful at the end, knowing his son's death had been avenged and his knowledge preserved. She thought of Nathaniel Brennan, who died at 29 without learning his father's skills, but whose sacrifice had created the opportunity for that knowledge to pass to someone who would use it and teach it and preserve it. And she thought of the continuous line of warriors stretching back through time, snipers and marksmen and hunters who'd perfected the craft of precision shooting through generations of accumulated wisdom. She was part of that line now, connected to the past and the future simultaneously. The tradition didn't die, it evolved, it adapted, it welcomed those who had the skill and heart to master it, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. Excellence was the only standard that mattered. Everything else was just noise. Kira turned from the window and picked up Brennan's logbook. She had another class to teach in an hour, advanced long-range shooting techniques for Special Forces soldiers preparing for deployment. She'd share the old-school wind reading methods Brennan had taught her, demonstrate the fundamentals her father had drilled into her since age 8, pass forward the hard-won knowledge that made the difference between success and failure. Because that's what warriors did. They fought, they learned, they taught. They ensured the next generation was better prepared than they had been. The Barrett M82 sat in its case, her father's serial number visible on the exterior. M82-039-TC, Trevor Charles Ashford's rifle, carried through Desert Storm, through her own deployments, through the mission that had eliminated Hassan al-Rashid. Someday, when her shoulder finally gave out and medical retirement became reality, she'd pass that rifle to another young shooter, someone worthy, someone who'd honor its history while writing new chapters. But not yet. She still had work to do, classes to teach, knowledge to share, a tradition to preserve. Kira Ashford, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, Phantom, picked up her teaching materials and headed for the range. The legacy continued. It always would. Because somewhere, her father and Wyatt Brennan were watching, making sure the next generation didn't miss. And they wouldn't miss. They never would. The story would be told in special operations communities for years. The impossible shot at 2,387 meters, the legend of Phantom and Granite working together for one perfect mission. But the real story was simpler. A father who taught his daughter to shoot. A mentor who found redemption through teaching. A tradition that survived because warriors had the courage to pass knowledge forward. The shot that eliminated Hassan al-Rashid was perfect, but the shot that hit its mark across generations, ensuring the tradition lived on through those willing to teach and learn, that shot would echo forever.